No foreign boots. No press conferences. No predictions. Just sand, silence, and the sudden roar of sovereign fire. From July 15 to 19, 2025, the world missed a shift that could change Africa's military history. In the heart of the Sahel, Mali's armed forces, FAMA, did something no analyst expected. They fought, and they won. This was not a symbolic skirmish. This was a surgical reconquest. 3 strategic regions, Menaka, Segou, Timbuktu, once safe havens for terror, lit up with precision drone strikes, coordinated raids, and tactical brilliance. Over 100 insurgents neutralized. Zero press coverage in the West. Why? Because the old story, Africa pleading for help, is no longer true. A new map is being drawn in the sand. And this time, Mali is holding the pen. If you believe Africa deserves the right to defend itself with its own hands, like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe. This is no longer a documentary. This is a declaration. From July 15 to 19, Mali's armed forces, in coordination with the Sahel States Alliance AES, launched large-scale anti-terror operations across Menaka, Segou, and Timbuktu. The results were staggering: over 100 insurgents neutralized, logistical bases destroyed, and enemy supply lines severed. But this was not just military might, it was strategic evolution. For the first time in decades, Mali is not reacting. It is anticipating. And as we break down what really happened in those 5 days, one question remains. Was this the beginning of Mali's full reconquest? The sand of Menaka has witnessed centuries of movement, of merchants, nomads, and more recently, men with guns and no faces. But on July 15, 2025, the desert moved differently. It was not a caravan. It was a message. At precisely 4:13 a.m., a high-altitude drone launched from a temporary AES base along the tri-border zone. Its flight path was silent, its mission was not. Below, in the critical corridor of Andorin-Bacane, a cross-border passage known for smuggling arms and harboring retreating jihadists, roughly 40 militants were sleeping. They believed dawn would come as usual. But Mali no longer waits for the dawn. It brings its own. In a single coordinated strike, FAMA, supported by AES intelligence and drone command, launched what is now being called the founding strike of a new Sahel doctrine. The impact was not only physical, it was psychological, political, and continental. Because Menaka is not just a dot on a map. It is a symbol of everything the Sahel has lost, and everything it now demands back. For years, the region was considered irredeemable. Western advisors drew red zones around it. Aid workers circled it on paper but avoided it in person. Even the Malians, some say, had emotionally abandoned it. The tri-border zone was dubbed the Wild East, where warlords ruled. Weapons flowed, and terror bred like bacteria in the sun. And then came the silence of the drone. No warning. No negotiation. No boots on the ground. Just precise information. Good coordination, and the will to act. The 40 men eliminated that morning were not mere foot soldiers. Among them, according to intercepted SIGINT, were a key logistics commander, a cross-border smuggler, and 2 foreign trainers linked to external networks suspected of ties with Al-Qaeda and ISGS. The operation did not just sever a tentacle of terror. It amputated the arm. But perhaps more important than the strike itself was the orchestration. This was not just a Malian mission. It was AES in motion. Fighters from Burkina Faso had relayed airspace permissions. AES intelligence pulled from Niger's border patrols helped confirm movement patterns. Drone pilots from a joint unit trained with the help of Turkish systems carried out the final maneuver. The strike was successful because it was African-led, African-coordinated, and Africa-centered. And herein lies the shift: this is no longer about terrain. This is about narrative. Menaka was the first domino. But it also tested something deeper: whether the region had learned to think like an organism again. Because this war is not fought on front lines. It is fought in the shadows between villages, in convoys masked as aid, in meetings conducted via SMS in 3 languages. It is asymmetrical. And until now, the Sahel had only defended, not maneuvered. Menaka proved it could maneuver. For the first time, the enemy was not intercepted as they approached a target. They were struck where they felt most untouchable, asleep. In retreat, in routine. The game has changed. Now, think of this like a game of chess. For years, the Sahel states only moved pawns, reacting, blocking, sacrificing. But Menaka was the queen's move. Bold. Calculated. Designed to control the center. And it forced a question on all observers, both in and outside Africa. Who is really shaping the battlefield now? Let us not romanticize this, the war is far from over. But something deeper has shifted. Menaka was not just a success. It was a rehearsal for sovereignty. And in this rehearsal, every detail matters. The drone used was not American. The intelligence did not come from Paris. The authority to strike was not outsourced. The decision belonged to Mali, and Mali alone. This is what it means to fight on your own terms. Some in Western capitals called it dangerous improvisation. Others dismissed it as a temporary high. But those who say this never walked in Menaka. Never watched children flinch at the sound of motorcycles. Never wondered if the next knock at the door would be a militia. For the people of Menaka, this was not politics. This was a breath of fresh air. A rare moment when fear blinked first. And it rippled. Across village radios in Gao, stories spread of the strike. They saw nothing, an old man said, but their roofs shook. In Niamey and Ouagadougou, military planners reviewed the Menaka blueprint and began replicating formations. In Brussels, a quiet report warned that non-aligned African military collaboration is proving unexpectedly efficient. Unexpected, yes. But also, inevitable. For how long can a people beg for safety before they build it? Menaka was not built by diplomats. It was built by dignity. By soldiers who stopped waiting for recognition and started creating results. And now, we ask you. If you believe in this dignity, if you believe that the right to defend one's land is sacred. Whether in Washington or Waraba, then let your voice be heard. Drop a comment below. Let the world know that Menaka is not just a dot on a map. It is the first step in a new doctrine of African reconquest. Because from here on, the desert remembers. Segou is not famous. It does not make headlines, and its name rarely echoes beyond West Africa. But in the veins of Mali, Segou is the heart that pumps survival. It feeds the south. It links the center. It stores the grain that prevents famine. And now, it holds the line between sovereignty and sabotage. On July 17, 2025, the quiet town of Nono, tucked inside the Segou region, became the stage for another unannounced war chapter. This time, it was not just insurgents hiding in sand dunes. It was an organized, hardened logistics base, nestled in the dry grass, with weapons, fuel, and fighters ready to move. Their target, the arteries of the south. For months, the terrorists had quietly transformed Nono into a ghost hub. They used abandoned schools as warehouses, camouflaged tents as field clinics, and dirt paths as delivery lines. Drones couldn't always see them. But people could. And people began to talk. It was not a satellite or radar that first uncovered the base. It was a farmer whose son had vanished while selling mangoes near a road checkpoint. It was a woman whose brother stopped sending messages after being forced into security work for a shadowy convoy. It was whispers across market stalls and silence at funeral prayers. This time, intelligence was not extracted. It was offered. That is how FAMA found them. With human intel guiding electronic surveillance. The army plotted a surgical route. At dawn, the air cracked, 2 drone-launched missiles opened a breach, and within 7 minutes, the Malian Rapid Intervention Force descended from 3 sides. What they found shocked even seasoned soldiers. Inside the base were maps of Segou's canal systems, detailed blueprints of irrigation networks, and a strike plan for the Office du Niger. The attackers had not come for soldiers. They came to choke food. To Mali, this was not just terrorism. It was economic warfare. The Office du Niger is more than an agricultural zone. It is a symbol of post-colonial Mali's ability to feed itself. Spanning over 100,000 hectares, it provides rice to over half the population. It employs thousands. And it has long been in the crosshairs of those who wish to collapse Mali from within, by hunger. Destroy a convoy. That's a headline. Destroy the harvest. That's a nation. But FAMA was faster. In under 2 hours, over 30 combatants were eliminated, several ammo stockpiles were destroyed, and encrypted communication devices were seized. One such device, later analyzed by AES cyber units, revealed a coded message: disrupt water, cut the roots. They were not just hunting soldiers. They were hunting the future. This realization changed everything. Until Segou, many analysts still saw the conflict as reactionary. But this strike revealed a deeper pattern: the enemy was adapting, targeting lifelines, not outposts. And so, the military must adapt too. Segou became a case study in preemptive doctrine. No longer reacting to attacks, but studying intentions, anticipating disruptions, and eliminating threats before they manifest. This is not just modern warfare. This is what it means to reclaim narrative control. And it only worked because Mali had something most nations often overlook in conflict zones: trust. Not trust in foreign security pacts, but in its people. It was a market vendor who first warned soldiers of strange men with tablets near the canal. It was a retired engineer who remembered where old radio towers still worked. It was, once again, the community, not a contractor, that saved the day. This matters. Because every time Mali strikes, it is not just FAMA in motion, it is the will of millions refusing to be afraid. And that will is contagious. Within days of the Segou operation, Burkina Faso began mapping its agricultural corridor. Niger tightened air patrols near major water reservoirs. The AES, once labeled an ad hoc pact, began to look like a long-term military ecosystem. An ecosystem of purpose, of strategy, of sovereignty. But of course, not everyone celebrates that. In policy rooms far from Segou, the words Malian aggression began appearing in reports. Think tanks called it excessive escalation. Aid agencies worried about loss of neutrality. But none of them had stood in no-no. None of them had seen fertilizer become gunpowder. None had heard prayers in the dark from farmers who feared both the insurgents and the silence that followed. So let us be clear. Neutrality in the face of annihilation is not peace. It is paralysis. And Mali is done being paralyzed. Segou was not an accident. It was a lesson, written in the soil, sealed with sweat, and signed by sacrifice. The lesson is this: you do not negotiate with those who target your harvest. You do not delay when they map your rivers. You act. You protect. And you reclaim. If this sounds radical to some ears, perhaps that is because they've never had to defend food with bullets. But Malians have. So now we ask you, viewer, wherever you are, if you believe that the right to eat in peace is worth defending. If you believe that rice is not a battlefield, but can become one when sovereignty is denied, then stand with Segou. Comment below. Share this story. And remind the world. Africa's wars are not always about land. Sometimes, they are about water, grain, and the silence between two harvests. And that's why victory in Segou meant more than just numbers. It meant life. Timbuktu is a name that carries myth. To some, it is poetry. To others, a mirage. But to Mali, on July 19, 2025, it was a battlefield. Long removed from the golden age of scholars and manuscripts. The region had become a corridor of retreat. A buffer. A ghost town flanked by fear. For insurgents, it was the last exit before real war. For the Malian army, it was the final frontier of reconquest. On that day, in the vast emptiness of Menaka, 2 pickup trucks, both modified with mounted machine guns and carrying armed fighters, sped toward a logistics convoy heading north to Agalok. The convoy was crucial. It carried not just fuel and food, but something even more vital: confidence. Confidence that the state still functions. That roads still matter. That sovereignty is not an idea, it is a truck. On time. The insurgents thought they could strike and vanish, like before. But the map had changed. The signals had changed. Mali had changed. At 10:27 a.m., they were spotted by a fixed-wing reconnaissance drone, operating in silence. 1,500 feet above. Within 60 seconds, the convoy commander received coordinates. Within 90 seconds, a strike order was confirmed. Within 3 minutes, both pickups were ash. No firefight. No warning. No room for chaos. Just silence and sovereignty in motion. But that was not all. The same day, 17 kilometers west of that strike, FAMA uncovered a second terrorist base, hastily built with tarpaulin roofs, camouflage netting, and 3 lookout posts. It had been a forward staging point, stocked with diesel, cash, and encrypted radios. And it had one more thing, a map. But this was no ordinary tactical map. It was a map of zones of influence. Red circles marked where the insurgents believed the state had no reach. Black dots indicated friendly zones controlled by informants or sleeper cells. At the very top corner of the map, one word had been scribbled in French. Vacuum. To the enemy, Timbuktu was a vacuum. A place left to fate. A forgotten corner. That is where they were wrong. Because on July 19, Mali filled the vacuum. Not with diplomats. Not with handouts. But with strategy, velocity, and precision. This was more than a tactical cleanup. It was a message to insurgents, to civilians, and most of all, to the world. No part of this country is too far to defend. For years, Timbuktu had been a question mark. Every election, every press conference, every foreign aid report asked the same thing, but what about the north? As if Mali must always choose between progress and geography. But the AES is building a different answer. Instead of abandoning the north to warlords, they are integrating it into a regional defense web. The strike at Menaka was not isolated. It was informed by data from Niger, coordinated with Burkina's Air Command, and reinforced by AES's real-time battlefield mapping system. That system, codenamed NKO, uses AI-assisted pattern recognition to predict enemy movement. Built by Sahelian engineers, it is fed by satellite imagery, drone footage, and even community alerts sent by text message. It is not just defense. It is digital sovereignty. And it was tested, for the first time, over the skies of Timbuktu. The results were staggering: 2 kills, 1 base neutralized, and 0 casualties. But what mattered more was the perception. For the first time, villagers in the outskirts of Timbuktu saw something different, not just soldiers, but coordination. The strikes were followed by ground patrols, who, instead of yelling commands, asked questions. Who gathered elders to map water points. Who brought back one of their own, abducted months ago. Now liberated. This was not the Mali of 2012. This was a state that remembered where it had bled, and came back to heal. But not everyone cheered. In diplomatic corridors, whispers spread: is Mali overreaching? In think tanks, concern mounted: what if this emboldens other nations? In Paris, silence. In Washington, caution. Because what happened in Timbuktu broke a silent rule, that sovereign action by African states must remain defensive, symbolic, and dependent. But this was offensive, autonomous, and unapologetic. It was not just a strike. It was a pivot. It meant that AES was not waiting for an invitation to secure its territory. It meant that Mali was not asking permission to breathe in its own north. And it meant that the Sahel had redrawn its own map, with lines etched in courage. Let us not misunderstand this: Timbuktu remains fragile. The roads are mined. The schools half-built. The promises, long broken. But for the first time in years, something louder than fear echoed across the dunes: movement. And in war, movement is everything. Because stagnation kills more than bullets. It kills belief. And belief is what keeps nations alive. This is the new doctrine of the Sahel. To fight not just for land, but for rhythm. For movement. For return. Timbuktu is no longer a vacuum. It is a vortex, pulling Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger toward something unprecedented: unity through action. If you watched this far, ask yourself, when was the last time an African army made you believe? If this stirred something in you, let it stir something in others. Comment your thoughts. Share this story. Subscribe and stand with the momentum. Because the desert no longer forgets. And the north no longer waits. It would be easy, almost seductive, to end the story here. To close with flames in Menaka, silence in Segou, and the rising flag over Timbuktu. To declare that the Sahel has turned a page. But stories like these do not end in gunfire. They end in questions. Because after the drones leave and the dust settles, someone must return. Someone must rebuild the school that jihadists turned into a command post. Someone must replant the field where bombs now lie buried. Someone must look into a child's eyes and explain why home still feels like exile. That someone is not a soldier. And that is the real war. Military victories matter. They shift power. They reclaim roads. They send a message. But they cannot rebuild trust. They cannot replace what was stolen in silence, dignity, belonging, and belief. And that is where the hardest terrain begins, inside. Inside villages divided by fear. Inside families torn by recruitment. Inside nations learning how to walk again without the crutch of foreign orders. You can strike with precision. But can you govern with compassion? You can reclaim land. But can you reclaim meaning? This is the question that haunts every commander who returns from victory with a quiet heart. The question that whispers across battlefields. Now that we can win, can we heal? The Sahel is not just a battlefield of bullets. It is a battlefield of narratives. Of memory. Of what a child believes when he hears a drone, hope or fear. That battle is just beginning. And no drone, no AES alliance, no doctrine of Reconquest can fight it alone. This is not to undermine the victories of Menaka, Segou, or Timbuktu. They are real. They are earned. They are vital. But they are not enough. Because sovereignty is not just the right to shoot. It is the responsibility to sustain. And if the Sahel is to rise, not just resist, then it must build faster than it bleeds. That means schools before strategy. Community radios before military briefings. Healing before headlines. It means remembering that the strongest walls are built not with stone, but with stories. And the most dangerous vacuum is not territorial, it is emotional. Let no one mistake this, the fight is not over. It has only changed form. Now the war is for the soul of the Sahel. And it will not be won in silence. So if you have watched, listened, and felt the rhythm of this turning tide, then carry this truth with you. Victory is not a place. It is a process. And we are all now part of it. This is not the end. This is the moment we remember what we're fighting for. Not just for territory, but for teachers returning to classrooms. Not just for victory, but for villages without fear. Not just for sovereignty, but for souls that believe again. The Sahel is rising, not in rage, but in rhythm. Not to destroy, but to rebuild. Not to beg, but to become. Menaka, Segou, Timbuktu, they were not just battlegrounds. They were mirrors. They showed us who we are, and what we must never become again. So if this story stirred you, if it echoed something ancient in your blood, or new in your dreams, then do not be silent. Like this video. Leave a comment. Subscribe to join a voice that won't be silenced. Because this movement needs more than witnesses. It needs guardians. And now, the fire is in your hands. Let it burn, so that no child in the Sahel ever has to grow up under shadows again.